Professor Abernethy is such a distinguished person, but she's written a book on worship. I think was sponsored by the Templeton Foundation. And yesterday, Cherry, when I met you said, "Gee, you got to read Alexis' book on music." Well, I haven't read many books on music, but you started showing me the jazz chapter, and I was mesmerized. What struck you about that chapter?
Well, as a PK myself,
and musician, right?
Well, I did.
In fact, you said your grandmother went to Juilliard, right?
My great aunt is a graduate of Juilliard.
And you play the piano as well, right?
I do, but not for public consumption. I like to do that privately, but I did train classically. But I do love music, and I do resonate with the healing power of music, and it doesn't have to be a certain type of music. And one of the things that struck me as I read through Dr. Abernethy's book, it was a fantastic book on transforming lives in worship and how that occurs and how that happens. And I was just taken by the chapter on jazz and talking about how jazz in and of itself is a place where a lot of things happen. You have these experts and very well-trained people coming together to play music, and as they interchange and experience that expression of music, a lot of things can happen, a lot of good things can happen. And some of those jazz musicians, like Duke Ellington, saw their jazz creation and their composition and their performance as being an opportunity to worship and to give back, to reflect their talent and to move people in a positive way. And
Alexis, when you wrote the chapter on jazz, you seemed to, it was almost like I was reading group therapy. How does jazz relate to group therapy?
Yeah. Well, I'd connect that in a couple of ways. First, that chapter was inspired by James Newton, who's an internationally renowned flautist, and I had the opportunity to do the sacred works of Duke Ellington with his Luckman Jazz Orchestra. And Tyson Chung, one of my former students, and Charcy Sawyer actually wrote that chapter in my edited book, Worship That Changes Lives. Well, one of the ways that I build on that and continue to think about that is like, a jazz ensemble. There's an article on group therapy about empathy where the subtitle is Facilitating Resonant Chords.
Wow.
And
facilitating
resonant chords. So you can think about a group leader is a group leader trying to direct or make things happen. No, you're almost trying the notes that people bring, and a chord is not a single note. If everybody's doing the same thing, that actually can be a little boring. A single note can be beautiful, but a chord can even be, in terms of a jazz chord especially, more magnificent, just so lovely and sound out of this world. So that's part of what a group leader is maybe trying to do, to bring out, and sometimes that's painful. Sometimes a chord, if it's a diminished seventh, jazz chords often have a sense of both the hope, the complexity, beauty,
and
but
tension.
also pain.
And tension.
Yeah, the tension.
You get the
pain.
tension, and then you get the resolution.
Exactly, that's right.
Yeah.
And all of that is important. The pain, and then the hope, and that comes as a result of working through that. It's a wonderful way of thinking about what happens in the context of group therapy. You never know what's going to emerge. Improvisation is a key dimension of jazz. Well, sometimes we as people, and especially we as mental health folks, want to maybe control things. We think we know maybe more than we really do know. The beauty of group is the group learns as much from one another, and frankly more, than they do from the leader. So a jazz ensemble works best not when one person's saying, you do this, you do that. No. You create an environment, an atmosphere that feels comfortable enough that folks can flow. Now, you can't be playing all different kinds. You need to be playing in the same key.
Right.
So the leader needs to keep you in the key. But you want some flexibility in the midst of that. And then things surprise you. Moments come where people touch the story of one person. And this is what's so powerful about your approach. you really encourage people to share their stories. So as one person shares authentically their story, it resonates with another person. You're not only having the leader be empathic toward another member, but member to member. They'll sometimes feel empathic toward a member in the group in a way that they haven't even experienced in their lives. Well, when they learn that in the group, then they can go back into their lives with their families, in their communities, and maybe have a deeper capacity for empathy and love and care.
And
Go ahead.
Well, I was just the thought I had was, as you were speaking, was that empathy, that resonant chord that happens in the group,
Yes.
is so powerful. And just as music will enable us to say the unsayable, it allows us to articulate things, or it articulates things for us sometimes that we have difficulty articulating for ourselves. Do you think that group actually does that? That it can actually give words and give form to feelings, deep feelings that people have that they can't express themselves?
Absolutely, absolutely. We think about metaphor in that exact way. That if you say a metaphor, this is either in the form of an analogy, or you're saying this symbolizes X. Or even if you would be thinking about a piece of music, well, you have an idea of part of what you mean by that, but there's a whole nother part that you don't even have a sense of. But it seems like that's the moment to share that song, to share that poem. It could be anything artistic, or that image. So that's what's lovely, because one member might be sharing a song or something that's artistic, and then another member resonates with that and sees another side of it.
Wow.
Well, that might not even been what the person who originally shared had in mind, but then that's part of the resonance.
Now, when you talked about Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, you kind of put a spiritual spin to it. In fact, you said the Duke always traveled with his minister. Is that true?
I don't know for sure because I haven't interviewed him, but people that have.
Sometimes he traveled with a Catholic priest, and sometimes a Lutheran minister.
Yes.
So he had a real spiritual core to him.
He totally did. This was new to me. I did not know about the sacred works of Duke Ellington. We know about his jazz more in a secular kind of way, but his spiritual life was very rich and very deep. And you hear then the discussion of some people, when they are engaged in music, they look at music, no matter where you personally are, there's something spiritual about it that transcends the individual. He talks about that. Wynton Marsalis also talks about that.
Oh, what does Marsalis say?
The same idea that there's a spiritual dimension to music that is even in the music itself. The performer can bring that, but there's something about the music itself that is beyond the person.
Wow.
And when jazz happens in this kind of organic way and the improvisation just goes, there are moments when that's even more tangible and obvious. It's powerful.
And then you talked about in your book, Duke's last concert. He played, the orchestra went away, and he got back to the piano. His old age, he just kept playing. And then the bass guy came back and played until 3 in the morning. And then he died the following day. So
that was a whole nother dimension, a gift.
What's that about?
Taken over.
So the spiritual took over.
That's right. The spiritual dimension just even more so takes you to a place that you might not have even imagined, conceived of.
Now, some people said, you're the next Maya Angelou. You met her?
I have.
What was it like to meet Maya Angelou?
Her grandeur, her humility. It's amazing to think of the artistry that has come from her, and birthed in pain too. For her, she comes across, you feel that magnetism, you feel the depth of her spirit, but also so approachable. A loving, caring person. Those were some of my impressions. Yes.
Why the caged bird sings.
Absolutely.
Why does the caged bird sing?
I think the power of transformation if you think about it, it's change from one state to another. When one is caged, the essence, you either die, frankly, right?
Either what?
You either die
Die.
or you allow yourself to be transformed. You yield.
That's so powerful, Damien family. She said, when one is caged, you either die or you allow yourself to be transformed.
Yeah.
Say a bit about transformation.
This is one of the things I've been studying spiritually. What happens in worship? One way to think about change is if we are going to church and in services, we may feel emotionally charged. But the question we had in terms of transformation, do you also do things differently? So one of the things that we interviewed 75 people, Pentecostals and Presbyterians from 4 different ethnic backgrounds, African American, Korean, Latino, and Caucasian. And we asked them whether they were changed as a result of their experience in church. Well, what they talked about is they talked about hearing something in the sermon that did have them realize, I need to go home now and forgive someone in my family, someone that I'm close to. Now that was a powerful emotional experience, like they might have been convicted, but it also resulted in behavioral change. They actually did something different. So what we found is that process of spiritual transformation is almost an integrated. We were surprised, frankly, that the sermon was a pivotal point. It could have been the music, but what they said, no, we understood something different, but it was not only cognitive, it was also emotional, and it was relational. So it's as if it was an integrated change, not just a spiritual high
that's
or
the key.
emotional high.
I think relational is the key because,
Explain.
well, I think having grown up in the same kind of environment, in a church environment, and I've loved my parents, and that my dad's a pastor as well, but my husband and our family now is Jewish, and there's transformation isn't particular to a specific religion or race or socioeconomic status. It happens in the heart. And I think that when we have pain in our heart and we have trauma or we have things that affect us to the point where we don't hear things the way that we used to hear, or we don't, church or synagogue or any of those things just don't mean anything to us anymore. It's through relationship, it's through people telling their stories and sharing their stories and empathizing and understanding that what's my problem is also your problem, and what you've experienced or what someone else has experienced, no matter where they come from, it's what's personal is universal, and having that common sort of empathic connection with people can penetrate a lot of the resistance that I think we may have to traditional church or synagogue or some of those truths, environments that we've grown up with.
Wow.
So I think what she's saying is very powerful, that the transformation happens because of authentic, real live people touching real live people.
I love when she said, if you're caged, you either die or you become transformed. That's quite a choice.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break and be right back.